Everyone, to our latest edition of Ask the Experts, our weekly Q&A series. My name is Joe Murphy, Marketing Manager at Sigilant. I'm joined by Dr. Ben Harrison. Ben, thanks for taking the time to speak with us today. Folks, the topic of conversation today is going to be around Security Operations Centers, SOCs. Ben, I know you have some experience in the world of Security Operations Centers. You're a perfect guest for this topic. So without further ado, Ben, well, first we're going to keep this a little, we're going to go through a lot of information today, you guys. So stick around. It's going to be very, very valuable for folks that have been on the fence, maybe have had some conversations with upper management and their, budgets or projects for outsourcing their security operations may have gotten shot down. Listen to some of the insights that Ben's going to provide. Take that if you can and apply it to your business. See if you can, take advantage of Ben's expert insight here. So, Ben, without further ado, how long have you been in cybersecurity?
I'm glad you asked that question, because the question I thought you were going to ask is how long have you been working in cybersecurity? But two quite different answers. So answering the how long I've worked in cybersecurity, I've really been involved in security applications in the security field for all of my professional career. While I initially started out professionally, coming out of college and university as a software developer, it was for security products in that space. And as time moved on, I moved to different aspects of it, covered more and more of the security space. And I like to think I haven't lost my roots, but my passion does lie with security. So professionally speaking, probably now 15, 20 years, somewhere in there. In terms then of my personal interest and my personal involvement in security, I remember the first time I think my parents told me off for doing something, but I could tell their heart wasn't in it. And it's whenever they put a dialer blocker on the phone to stop people dialing the internet, because I was a great fan back from the early 90s. And the first thing that I did was immediately write something called a war dialer, which just got past the block. And that must have been about, I feel like I was 9 or 10 years old around about then. And that was really one of the first forays into security that I had, was whenever I was able to get access to the internet and access the wider security community, be it on bulletin boards or the emerging World Wide Web. So it's been a while, and I'm glad I have been in the industry so long, and I look back with fond memories on all of it, thankfully.
Yeah, that's excellent. And why are we able today to talk to you about building a security operations center, Ben?
Good point. Well, for the past 9 months for Sigilant, that's what I've been doing. I've been building our capacity out into an additional site in Belfast in the UK. And we've been focusing really on what it is makes good security. Now, that's a key point, because it's easy to set up a security operations center. It's easy to do that. It's hard to set up a security operations center that really delivers tangible and demonstrable customer security value. It's a lot easier to set up a security operations center for a single business, a single function, than it is to set up in the MSSP environment. And the reason is because you can't tailor it as much. We have to be generic. We have to be everybody's idea of perfect security, not just one company's. And so it's certainly a bigger challenge. And from my previous roles at previously Alert Logic, that again heavily involved in driving what it is provides good security, what it is that demonstrates to customers, look, we've got your back, we know what you need, and we're giving it to you. And so that's really about the core of the message from my perspective. It's not it's not a situation of being able to say good security looks like this, because there's no one thing. Good security looks like what it needs to for individual organizations. And having the breadth of experience, which you get in an MSSP for security as a service, is huge. I always share that with people. Whenever people ask me, what's it like working in your place? The answer is, it's like being on a merry-go-round, if you guys get the term, a fairground ride. Sure. It's going at 100 miles an hour and never stops. But it is exceptionally good to get experience. Most of the SOC analysts I know who work for a single organization, don't get me wrong, they're good guys, but they see one world. They tend to get kind of settled in it, they understand it, they work through it. And I've been really lucky to be able to bring some of them into the likes of this organization and the previous ones, where you can say, look, the world's bigger than you see in one organization. Look beyond, and they get huge advantages from having that breadth of experience, because they see it all eventually.
And then we pass that to our customers with the benefits of scale.
Absolutely. In a single organization, if you're breached with a malware you've never seen before, that's the first time you've seen it, and panic usually sets in. And as well as that, maybe you only see new malware once every couple of years, whereas with Sigilant we see new malware every day. And it's not a shock to us, it's not a surprise to us. And the chances are, if you've been hit by an attack, then at least one of our other customers will be as well. So safety in numbers, you definitely get that scalable advantage.
Absolutely. That's the case in a lot of things in life, right? So, Ben, you recently set up the SOC. Where'd you start?
Right. So I like to sort of group this, and I'm almost talking about this in connection to the next question you're going to ask. So the first place to start is product. And what I mean by that is, what are you actually doing? What's the purpose of your SOC?
Mm-hmm.
And again, as I said before, there's loads of different types of SOC. So is it 24/7, 365, or is it just daytime business hours? What are you monitoring? Are you monitoring everything in a single organization? Or are you just monitoring the high value assets? What does monitoring look like? How much response do you need to do? What actions? What SLAs? So the first thing is understand, look, what is the actual service? And from Sigilant's perspective, we have a very clearly defined service. So it's easy for us to say, all right, well, this is what the service description says, and this is what we do. And that was relatively easy in terms of Sigilant. Now, I'll take other previous examples in my previous lives. If you don't know what the service is, you have to start a little bit before. You need to start with, look, well, what are we trying to provide? And if you're building a SOC, the first question is, what is our service? What is our product? What is our output? Because we're here for a reason. It's usually driven by risk or by financials. What is the expectations here? And if it's a small business and you're thinking about setting up a SOC, well, you need to be realistic. If you want to set up a world-class SOC, which is going to go toe-to-toe with the biggest security SOCs in the world, and you have 25 employees right now, probably not going to be able to do that unless you are the 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000 who are really lucky and get the right person. So the first one is product. What are you doing? Are you just looking after your own assets? Is it everything? Is it desktops, laptops, phones, everything? Or is it just high-value servers? Understand your limitations and understand the expectations. That's the first point. And that will bring me on to the second and third parts whenever you ask me how you go about doing it.
Yeah, sure. So processes are always important. So you want to give us some examples of some that you had put in place, Ben?
Yeah, certainly. Well, the way I tend to think of, so my passion, I have real passion for security. I also have a passion for systems. I say systems, I mean organizations. And an organization is just a human system. And I think my background in programming, my background in systems design and architecture really has helped here, because I look at how you're building something in pretty much three terms. It's people, it's product, and it's processes. That's it. And it's who's doing it, what are you doing, what's your output, what does it look like, and how do you go about doing it. So I've talked a little bit about the product and understanding that and the importance, talking about the processes and the people. People are key. And whenever you whenever you clarify what it is you're actually doing, what the product looks like, you can then start to build your team, start to build the people, and start to build the processes around it. And processes themselves, again, to me, this is it comes from my programming background. I look at processes in 3 types. And the 3 types are, you've got generic processes, which everybody needs to work together. You can't do it without that. And whether you think your business has these or not, it definitely does. Your business has to, for example, understand that, look, the work day is 9 to 5, or it's 8 to 6, or whatever it is. And everyone has to more or less align to those sorts of the rules. So you have standard processes, which in a SOC talk about how do we contact customers? What are our service level agreements look like? What are our quality levels look like? How do we maintain quality? How do we ensure all customer events and tickets are reviewed? What systems and health checks do we need? It's basically all of it is about the work that we do, what we do, and how we go about it. So that's the first part. It's really defined by what the product is, and you work backwards. So you say, okay, so if the product is going to have these levels of output, what do I need to put in? What processes do I need to support that? And then with the people aspect, again, similar situation. You ask yourself, well, the people are going to be carrying out this work. What skill sets do I need? How do I build my organization around that? And generally speaking, if you look at processes, processes all flow into each other. So the output of one will be the input to the next. And any business should be able to take their final product output and effectively step back and back and back, layer by layer, function by function, and define every aspect of what they do. And as well as my interest in security, I do have a fairly heavy interest in compliance and certifications. And I'm a trained auditor for ISO 9001, for example, and that is all about business continuity and processes. And I mean, 27001 is your security aspects, but 9001 I actually find it more interesting, because it's about how do you build an organization that's sustainable, that's scalable, and that has real value as an organization. Not just you're able to pull it off once or twice because you're lucky. No, how do you build a machine that pulls it off every time and always succeeds? And that's really what the processes come down to. So we are closely aligned to the principles of ISO 9001, and it's something that I'm passionately involved in.
That's awesome. And leading into the next question here, Ben, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I have a sneaky suspicion what these three most important things might be about building a security operations center.
You are asking that question, but they're the three most important things. I'm not going to chicken out of the question, but they're the three most important things of building anything: product, processes, people.
Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit more about people as well,
Mm-hmm.
but I'll come back to that. And I don't want to chicken out of the question because really you're asking about SOC specific, not just for a generic,
Sure.
how do you build organizations. So for SOC specific, the most important thing is security. That's what you're there for. You're there to provide security in whatever definition the product description defines.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever the expectations are, that's what you're there to do. So you have to have a core of security there. In what form that takes, that actually is pretty nebulous. I mean, you can build an organization 10 different ways, and you can build it from similar sort of components, but certain components fit together and certain components don't. And generally, from a strategy perspective, you need to define a single strategy, because while there's 10 strategies that work, they typically don't work well together. And you need to set yourself a strategy which will work. So if your strategy is to, for example, start with a really key hire, you're going to hire a specific person who is a security guru. They're going to be the source of all knowledge, and all knowledge will flow from them. And that's a viable option. This is a model which has worked the world over. You hire that guru, and then you start to say, okay, here's the outputs. We're going to help you with process, but you're the root of the security knowledge. You're where that comes from. You then start to try and augment them as a team. You build out from that individual. Now, maybe you'll find another individual like that, but they're hard to come by. If you look at in the UK right now, there's something like 115,000 vacant cybersecurity jobs in the UK, something like that. And the US, I heard it's more. So
Yeah.
the number of vacancies are huge. And what that means is there are not enough security professionals so that everybody gets one. It just doesn't work. And you need to consider with people, if you're going to start with that guru, how many gurus are there? The reality is, to become a guru, talking years, 15, 20 years, while there are always prodigies, while there's always fantastic, excellent younger talent, to see the breadth of experience, usually you're talking about people who've been in the industry for 15 or 20 years. And from that perspective, they're hard to come by. So you look for that key hire and you build out. That's one way that you can operate. The other way you could operate, or another way you can operate, is you can say, right, we're going to get cases. We're going to get things that are going to come into us that we're going to have to review. So let's start ground up instead of top down. How do we handle those? And the answer has to be, okay, well, we need people to filter. So people are going to have to investigate and review that incident, that alert, that thing. And so what you're staffing for now is not a guru who's going to filter down. You're staffing for individuals who are going to be able to pick up that piece of work and do enough with it to get a security outcome. Maybe they're not driving to the absolute top level of security, but they can see when there's a problem. They can understand there's a problem, and then they're in the position to pass that on to another team who maybe can handle it. So maybe your security operations center is not doing any response. It's just identifying problems and passing those then on to your IT team, and your IT team will then take action. So it really comes down to, what are the limits and bounds? What is it you're looking to achieve? And then what people do you need to go and achieve that goal?
So moving into the next theme here, Ben, which is a DIY versus partnering with a
Yes.
managed service security provider. So,
Yes.
I mean, I want to, just because you talked about the people, let's flip these first two questions, Ben. So, in a perfect world, how many people would a company need to employ to run a SOC?
So it really comes down to, what is your SOC doing? Again, what is the product? And in this situation, let's assume that your product, and even internal product to the rest of your organization, is to give you security coverage 24/7. So you've always got someone with the light on watching, just in case that urgent high priority malware alert comes in. If that's the case, you need to staff 24/7. Now the reality is there's 167 hours in a week, and the average working week's only 40. So if you do the math, you've really got to have 5 people. I mean, people want to take holidays, they need to sleep, they need to see their partners and pets. So you need about 5 people to staff 24/7. Now you have interim options. I mean, for example, you can put people on call, but on call doesn't work particularly well if you've only got a single point support team. The reason is because with a security system, you're going to get lows, mediums, highs, and criticals. And it takes a bit of investigation to decide which it is. So if you're going to, for example, say, wake me up every time there's an alert, well, you're going to get a phone call. If we were doing that at Sigilant, we would be getting a phone call every 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So with our current volumes from customers, I mean, we get incidents very, very, very rapidly. And so it's impossible for us to use an on-call model. It's 30 seconds between each one. You don't even have to pick up the phone. So if you're in a smaller organization and you have your security tooling set up pretty well, maybe you can do an on-call type system. But it all comes down to data at that point. So you need to understand your environment. You need to make sure your system is well tuned. And then maybe you can get away with an on-call. But all it takes is a new attack to come out, or a new scanner tool to come out, and you're getting woken up every 5 minutes for the next 6 weeks until there's patches and until there's defenses in place. So it is difficult to use on-call. Primarily, if you're covering 24/7, you need to have 5 people minimum.
Okay. You want to go on to the third question here, Ben, or do you want to cover the first one?
Which question?
Yeah, so essentially, what would a company need to do to build a SOC? And I feel like we've covered a lot of this.
Yeah, there's a few other things that I would throw in there. As I said, there's many ways you can build the world. You can't do it all ways at once, but you can build it different ways. And people need to decide what ownership their security operations has versus their IT team. Particularly as well, this becomes more complex if you now have a technical company, a company that has technical infrastructure, because other companies tend to now put their production systems under a DevOps type team or an infrastructure support and maintenance type team. But again, you've got to decide where's the line for security, and that line really dictates from where we're telling to doing. So if we're just informing other teams, okay, then the 24/7 support needs to be in those other teams to take action. If we're doing is telling them, if we're taking action, then resources need to be allocated accordingly. You need to push that line out, and you need to build in it as a function of those teams. So it really comes down to that. You need to decide what you're doing. It's frequently confused between, let's go with security monitoring or security analysis or security operations center, and security engineering. Security engineers would typically configure firewalls, would typically install security products, manage the security products, set the settings, perform things like patch management, perform activities like system scans, sweeps. That's an internal security engineer function. It's building the security tooling, building the security infrastructure. Analysis is more looking at the output from it. And really it's about defining those roles and defining specifically what's happening. And on my point about people being one of the most critical things, you might notice I like to think in threes. And there's sort of three factors or three elements I consider in order whenever I'm building groups of people. First one is function. What is this group of people going to do? And that's the most important one when building an organization. What is the function of the organization? Once you work that out, and I say work it out, all you're doing is make a big list of everything they're going to do. Are they going to do patch management? Are they going to do firewall detection and firewall modification of rules? Are they going to do user management? Are they going to add and remove users? All the functions you need. Your product description and your processes will feed into this. It's not a single point. These all have a bit of an overlap between them, and they all support each other. So you know all your functions. Now you can start to collect them into flows. As I said before, each of these functions or processes has an input and has an output, or multiple inputs and multiple outputs. So you start to arrange the functions. Graphically helps really well if you've got any of the project and organization building tools like Microsoft Video's particularly good for this. You start to put these together, and then naturally out of that diagram, you now have your business security process and flow diagram. You can now start to draw circles around it and go, okay, well, that function makes sense to be together with those ones and they flow into each other. Okay, so that there I have the makings of a team, and over here I have another team, over here I have another team, and it naturally sits. And then depending on load balancing, you can start deciding to move little bits around, make tweaks. And the result is that you've actually just got your formation or your company org structure out of that. You've got your SOC org structure out of that, because you know, okay, so we've got a red team who are going to be doing pen testing activities, who are going to be doing malware analysis, dangerous stuff. We know that they're going to be supported by a layer of intermediate analysts who are going to do sort of structured analysis of particular threats or attacks. And then we've got our triage team, and our triage team's at the cold face. They're digging through the alarms. I see how those are laid out. I see how they flow together. And you don't need to then go and draw a nice PowerPoint org structure, because you've already got it. The org structure is defined by the work you're doing and by the way that work interacts. And that makes it very clean. So you can understand just by looking at the outcome org structure and the people you have in it, what the purpose of the organization is. Because this follows right the way through to staffing. It follows right the way through to job descriptions, follows right the way through to all the HR functions to do with objectives, because you can see exactly what people need to be doing to perform the function to deliver on the business objectives.
And I mean, there's a lot of one-man bands out there, if you will.
Absolutely.
IT
and I
directors.
have a huge amount of respect. I, in other lives, have been that one-man band, and I have a lot of respect for people who do that. And please don't let me be misunderstood as saying that doesn't work, because it does. A one-man band works, a two-man band works. When you start to get a three-man band, or particularly that classic number of 5 for 24/7, it's a 5-man band who never see each other except for the 5 minutes during shift changeover. So yeah, I have a lot of respect for people who operate in that fashion, but it's really coming down to risk. The business decides, is one person enough to cover enough of our security cases that we accept the residual risk?
You talk a lot about
your question.
No, that's awesome. I just wanted to point that out. It's like, how do these single IT people manage all of this? So
well, it's mostly, if you look at it from an operations perspective, the key saving of a single person is that you've no communication necessary between different organizational departments.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, well, Joe, you and I, we work in different departments, but we have that direct link. I mean, you can pick up the phone and call me, and I can pick up the phone and call you. But even that link in itself introduces a little bit of lag, a little bit of delay. If your boss and my boss weren't so understanding, and we had to communicate via an organizational structure, just double, triple, quadruple the amount of time. So if you're in a smaller organization with a single person, the right single person can probably do a lot more than two people who are sort of middle of the road. And in engineering terms, there's the concept of something called a 10x developer. Mm-hmm. And it's this magician, this wizard, who just seems to do 10 times as much work. Now, in general, as I said before, maybe you build your team around the equivalent, a security guru, someone who really knows their stuff. But when you're building that, you need to be really aware of the people involved. People who are gurus are got to be that good because a lot of their personality traits lead them to be excellent, they have a real affinity and they drive for excellence in themselves and others. Sometimes that can be a bit abrasive. Sometimes that can cause difficulty if you try and pair them with very junior members of staff because they don't have time for them. So that's why I say you've got to decide how to structure your organization around those people and the personalities of them as well. But the one-man band works. A single organization, I've seen it a number of times in businesses going from the startup phase to the SME.
Mm-hmm.
And the startup phase is all hands to the pump.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You generally don't do most of the things you're meant to. And cautious in case this video ever gets released to the UK. In the UK, even the government gives you a certain amount of leeway. You don't have to file your accounts for like 2 years after startup because they're kind of saying, look, we know you've got things to deal with. If it all blows up, okay. But for now, do what you need to do, and we'll work out about the legislative and the certifications and the rest afterwards. So it's really there to stop stifling innovation. If the first thing you have to do when you're starting a business is, right, so we need to file our accounts and okay, we need to make sure we're compliant with ISO and compliant with every other thing, you never get off the ground. So it's important to businesses who are given that flexibility to innovate, that real agile element can't be lost. And in that perspective, yeah, if you get a one-man band security team, and that's IT, security, engineering, all in kind of one lump, they will perform impressive feats. The cautious thing you have to remember as you scale as a business is the minute you add a second person, you don't get double the output. You get a reduction. And I call back to my original electrical engineering days with CPU and processor design, where if you have dual cores, you don't get double the output. Because just to try and coordinate those different cores of your computer takes huge amount of overhead. And the same is true with people. The minute you've got two people, they now need to be in sync, and they might spend 25% of their time just talking to each other to make sure they're going the same direction.
Too many cooks in the kitchen type deal.
If they're going different directions, absolutely. And that even comes back to what I said about strategy. You can build a SOC anyway, but you can't build it two ways at once. So everyone has to be aligned on whatever the strategy is. Everyone's behind it, even if it's not maybe the most optimal. As long as it's the one everyone's aligned behind, you'll be far more successful. Like said before, 10 people following the same bad plan will still produce more output than 10 people following their own plan.
Yeah, it's true. It's funny you say that. Like, we see a lot of startups getting, heavy investments, and you got to figure, I mean, they just popped up. Their infrastructure is probably not built out as well as their IT team would hope it would be. And the conversations with those folks is always difficult, Ben, because, they have all this money and all this, IP to protect. They don't have infrastructure to protect either. It's it's very weird.
It's a challenging conversation. And again, referring to my previous lives, to pay the bills when I was a student, I did quite a lot of contracting work, and it was a challenge for me because you're walking into an organization and saying, I'm worth this amount and it's going to cost you this. And nobody wants to pay that in a small business. If they don't have to, they won't. But inevitably, nearly, I would say 50-60% of every business I engaged with, that decided not to go ahead with the service. I did get a call somewhere down the road from them saying, look, we've had a bit of a problem and we really need someone who, we went with a guy, he said everything was fine, but it's fallen to pieces, and we need you to come in and just fix all this. And that's what I mean about sort of the one-man band problem, is you can buy yourself peace of mind without actually buying yourself any security.
Right. So perfect segue into the next question for you, Ben. So SMEs, would you recommend that they attempt to build a SOC for themselves?
First question I would ask is, what size is your organization?
Okay.
What scale is your function?
So
the answer will eventually always be yes.
Yeah.
But when I say a SOC, coming back to the definition of what that means, every company needs to have its cybersecurity strategy, whether that be an addendum to their IT policy and strategy, but you need to have a decision on where you're going with it all. You can just take the startup approach and go, we'll deal with it if it blows up, otherwise we're ignoring it, and whatever happens, happens. You could take that, but the reality is, yeah, the reality is that you need to say, okay, so we're going to take 6 months and just hit the track running. We're going to focus all on product development, and our security policy is as simple as make sure everyone's got antivirus installed. We've no network, we've no infrastructure, nothing to secure. So just make sure everyone's got antivirus installed. Everyone got antivirus? Good, right, okay, that's it. Cost of that, $300, done, tick. Now, maybe that's your strategy for 6 months, but at the end of that, you've got to sit down and you've got to stop and you've got to say, right, okay, 6 months ago, that's what we decided, but now we've crossed a line. Either a time that you put in place where you're going to reassess, or you cross a line because you've just bought 50 servers, or you've just installed your third site. Certain trigger points need to be in that initial conscious decision. What are we going to do with cybersecurity? Antivirus. Okay, do some antivirus. Sure, we all have antivirus, and it's not going to be checked by anybody, but it's an agreement. There's only 4 of us, so we'll stick at our primary mission, make sure we have antivirus, and go from there. Okay, then it scales, and now you've got 4 sites, 40 people. At that point, somewhere along the line, there's a trigger where you go, no, hang on. Let's look at this again. Let's look back at our plan. Well, our plan said we're just going to put antivirus in every machine. Yeah, but it's not the 4 of us anymore. It's 40 of us. And I don't want to choose a specific name because guarantee someone of that name will be in the stream. But you can't trust as you scale. Trust as you increase the number of people, you decrease the possible amount of trust you can have. So you need to start putting policies in place. You need to start enforcing security. Those conversations are what decides when you need to build a SOC. Eventually, you do need to build a SOC. You need to build a function. But I'm not sure if you want to jump onto this, but the reason security as a service is so important is because you have a choice, nothing or 5 people. If you want monitoring. If you want to monitor what's going on, nothing or 5 people. And to talk about the importance of monitoring, I know it's not what we're focusing on. A couple of weeks ago, we had a specific breach. We told the customer within 5 minutes, or thereabouts, within 5 minutes, and they were able to rescue the scenario. If they had not have found out until, let's say, Monday morning, 9 a.m., whenever the security team comes in, and I think this occurred on a Friday night, maybe midnight US time. So if you've got 48 hours or you've got 56 hours between that point, that is enough for your whole network to be ransomware. You catch it when it happens and react when it happens, you can do something. You wait 2 days, you're stuffed. Wow. So it's really, really important to consider that if you're going to have that security function, you need the monitoring element in place. And that's where security as a service fits in, because effectively you buy what you need.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to time to detection, right? I mean, yeah. you know, the longer someone lays dormant or something lays dormant in your network, the greater the risk goes up. I mean, that's just obvious, but going back to an early point you said, and this is probably a huge challenge for a lot of these people, Ben. So I feel like, let's take the startup, for example. The conversation needs to be had at the earliest stage. So you kind of alluded to this, like you need to put that stick in the sand. You say, all right, you want me to do this for however many months? You know, we're going to get our next round of funding, hopefully next year. We're assuming that we're going to scale, obviously. Once we hit that threshold, then we need to reevaluate the situation. Yeah. But it's, you know, it's hard to do that if you don't set the precedent early. Exactly. And they don't involve these people in these conversations when they're building the business plan, right?
The the frustration I hold about that is huge. Anytime I start a new, let's go with venture, and I don't specifically mean anything by venture other than be it a new personal project, be it a new business, be it a new client, be it a new job, be it a new employee, it doesn't matter. I generally always start with a list of things. And if I'm building a business organization, I start with a list of about 10 or 12 things. And I'm happy to share them, but this isn't so much a security question. So if you want to bring this back to the security aspect, I'm happy to. But I start with a functional list. And I practice what I preach. So I start off, and that list is budget, purchasing and finance, community outreach and marketing, development and training, site expenses, travel and communications, facilities and resources, that's just places and tools, HR, legal, IT, security and access, leave, illness, objectives and review, organisation and leadership, recruitment, resignations, and social and personal. Those are my default starters. There's a few more that I sometimes use, but that's the default starters for any organisation. How do I deal with all of those things? So I'm not for a second suggesting that security needs to be top of the list, because it doesn't, but it needs to be in the list.
Right.
It really needs to be in the list. And from that perspective, if those 10, 12 things, anytime I start something, I immediately ask myself those questions. Look, what are the answers to these? And in the immediate term, particularly on a business element, the immediate term, finance and budget. Now, because budget begins with a B, it happens to be at the start of the list. But I mean, that's very important. You need to make sure you're paying your bills and you're paying your people. Mm-hmm. If you want to see, if you want to see how important that is, look at any examples where payroll has been mistaken, or there's been a mistake in payroll, particularly if it hasn't happened, how quickly service levels drop. You need to look after your people. People have mortgages to pay and food to buy, and you stop doing that, they get angry very quickly. But every one of those items, and focusing them back in on security, it's got to be in that list. It's in the top 10 list. What are you doing about IT? What are you doing about access control? What are you doing about security?
Yeah.
And the answer can't be nothing. Every item on that list, nothing in that list can be scored off in any modern business. You have to have all of those things, and you can defer them for a while. Even if you say, look, we're not going to have any facilities or site, we're not going to have anything, everyone's just working from home, so that's it. We're going to work on this for 3 months. Everyone works from home. That's fine. In 3 months we'll reassess. And likewise with security, you put it in the line and you say, all right, for now everyone's got antivirus. That's it. Outside of that, we're going to reassess in 3 months.
Yeah.
Either put a time on it or put a trigger on it, and make sure someone comes back to that list.
I want to run this by you real quick.
Sure.
So I think, and just the way that my mind works is that, if I was a business owner, I would focus primarily on my customers, obviously, because that's the lifeblood of any business. Now, I would think that if any of my customers, suffered a breach as a result of partnering with my business, that they would run for the hills. Now, that's just an assumption, but, you see the likes of the Targets and the bigger companies, it's like, yeah, that happened a couple of years ago. I mean, I'm even victim of it. I still go there. It's like, where does the reputation come into the mix? I mean, don't you think people would care a little bit more about the reputation of their business? Because, I mean, yeah, I guess it's sort of like, it's all reactionary and it's so frustrating.
To me, it's something that speaks very, very truthfully. You asked before, what are the key elements about security? And I kind of chickened out of the answer. One thing I'll call back to, and that is that the essence of good security is doing the basics well. But in terms of an organization which is security minded, that holds true. The organization has to do the basics well. Reputation management. So as I say on my list, community outreach and reputation. It's how do you build, you can call it branding, but it's more than that. It's how you're thought of. Now, the reaction to, if your partner or your supplier has been breached, the reaction right now is run for the hills. Absolutely right. But that's almost a panic reaction.
Yeah.
And as time moves on, so if you count, it depends what you mean by breach. Breach. Okay, here's a good example. Let's look at Zoom.
Yeah.
The platform we're on. Now, a lot of the press stories made a bigger thing of the issues than they actually were. Yes, there were issues, and the issues were people didn't enable security. Zoom had focused their market on a group of people who didn't see security as important. It had to be easy to use. People use Zoom because you just click on a link and then there's the people you know, and that's brilliant. Whereas if you go into WebEx, well, to type in my email and my name and I have to remember a password, and then someone gave me a PIN code. Where's the PIN code? I don't know. With Zoom, single link, there you go. So that was how they won the segment, but they were pummeled for it on their weakness. Now, on the other hand, if you look at Microsoft, Like, how many CVEs or common vulnerability enumerations are there for Microsoft? Microsoft are breached. If you look at their products are breached every second of every day.
The Microsoft world, I mean, it has to.
Yeah. If you even look at Linux, I mean, if you look at Linux, not as a brand, but as a sort of in the equivalent terms of Microsoft, which you can't, but if you were to do that, Linux open source things are breached every day. But the important part, the really important part where we will get to, is that people need to accept that security is a risk game. It's not a total defense game. And as well as that, people need to accept that breaches are going to happen. What is critical is to make sure that the company, the organization you're dealing with, has done their due diligence up front, so that when a breach does happen, that they react in the right way. They want to make sure that whenever someone is breached, that the email you get from them as a customer of them telling you, hello, we regret to inform you we had a security incident. It occurred 3 days ago. This is what was breached. This is what we did. And this is the impact to you. We have, for example, lost your records of all of your transaction with us from 2015 and prior. That data has been ransomware. Unfortunately, apologies, it is gone. And if you say that, and you're honest and you're open and you're upfront, in that situation, companies and customers will eventually, over time, not now, will eventually over time start to go, okay, so what's the actual impact to me? Actually nothing. They've responded the right way. They had the team in place. They did everything right. If you look at other organizations, the ones that tend to go very much south, they're breached. I mean, I don't like to pick on them. Look at TravelX. How long were TravelX offline? I recall, because it was maybe a month and a half after the breach, and I'm walking through the airport, and there's TravelX, and they're back to the Stone Age.
Is that the currency exchange company?
Sorry?
Is that the currency exchange company?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So literally back to the Stone Age. Their people have a clipboard with pens, and they're filling everything in on a pen, and then they have a lockbox with cash, and they're taking cash out of a lockbox and locking it with a key and putting it in their pocket. They were sent back to the Stone Age. Now, they maintain business operations, and that is commendable of them, but their security planning should have been better. Their recovery planning should have been better. So this all comes back to security is kind of insurance.
Yeah.
It really is. But if you don't have insurance and your house burns down, that is the biggest impactor to confidence.
Yeah.
And so we're able to honestly and truthfully tell whichever investigative body of the government decides to investigate you, plus your customers, we were breached. We responded immediately. We closed the breach. There is no impact. Your data is secure. That message, on honesty, being able to tell that message, comes from your preparation. And on day one that you start your business, you start by saying, what are we doing about IT, access, and security?
Ladies and gentlemen, write that down. I think,
yeah, do write it down, because I won't be able to remember any of this. This is live.
Yeah. No, this has been awesome. I really enjoyed this. I think out of this conversation, I think I have a couple of ideas for, some future Thursday webinars. So I think zero trust is a conversation that could be had. I'd love to get your opinion on that.
Trust nothing.
Yeah.
It's not an opinion. It's a fact. Well, it's not. It's yeah, happy to talk about it in a longer session, but you decide trust based on risk.
Yeah.
And a local politician once made a faux pas when describing trust, and I won't repeat it, but effectively he said, he was asked what he felt about a certain group of people, and he said, well, I would trust them to go to shops for me, but I might not trust them with a bank account. And very poor phrasing, but the core of the message, what he was trying to say was, I will trust somebody I know. I will trust somebody who has good reputation. I will not trust someone I don't know.
It's like a firewall.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That IP address has been bad 200 times. Not going to let it in.
Yeah.
Or I've never heard of that IP address. I mean, not hearing of an IP address is probably better than I've heard of it 200 times and it's bad. But absolutely key, trust and reputation. We could spend a week.
Yeah, Ben, I love the human element to cybersecurity, just like human nature and how it fits into it. I might go off and do some research on my own just because it seems to be an interesting topic. I'll do a quick Google search, see what I can find.
I am cautious in this webinar series. I know that the intent is to keep these easily consumable, and I tend to find just where I am at my position in my career and where I've come to, I find the biggest challenges and the biggest problems I have aren't cybersecurity. That's we know what we need to do there. It's just execution, and
Mhm.
we have a track record of executing. The biggest challenges we usually have are people,
Yep.
and organizations. So I find myself almost taking inspiration from the solved problems in engineering, the solved problems in security, and then now trying to map those same solutions to the people and organizational issues. Being very respectful that, well,
Hey,
people are people.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's an old saying, everybody makes mistakes, and Johnny's gonna fat finger something one day. So
Well, don't suggest that to
not our
Johnny.
John, not our Johnny, no,
Yeah, you might lose your.
some random Johnny. Looks like we got a question, Ben. So
Sure.
we are creeping up, or
Okay.
we go a little bit over, but that's okay. So we want to make sure that we address all these questions. So, and this is similar to some, what we've talked about in the past, but any alerts that you're seeing more of at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody and their pets. Well, if I was going to say everybody and their dogs, of which you have two, everybody is working from home. That means that unusual firewall breaches, unusual firewall connections from VPNs at strange times of the day or night are now happening a lot more. And this is interesting. Even people who normally only work 9 to 5 are now screwing up all of the behavioral analysis of what they do because their laptop's sitting on their coffee table and it's 9 o'clock at night, watching a bit of TV, a bit bored. They'll try and get a head start in the morning. So it's interesting to watch the pattern of logins radically change, but normally that would be an indicator of attack or compromise. You'd say, hang on, we'll come back to Johnny. Johnny doesn't log on at 3 o'clock in the morning. He does when he's working from home for 8 weeks. And
Yeah.
that's an interesting one for us to challenge because a lot of the established behaviors we've established with customers are just different. So yes, an awful lot of those kinds of alerts, which we normally wouldn't have. In terms of background noise, we've had a number of sessions where we've remarked that the number of phishing attacks, focusing particularly on COVID-19, is huge. It's just,
Man.
and particularly really well crafted ones. Every day, these guys up their game. And as much as I detest the practice, I respect the effort that's being put into this with things like perfect copies of the government loan scheme going out to businesses, perfect copies with only the tiniest of minor pixel variations in the URL. And real challenge. And from our perspective, the staying vigilant is key. But right way back to the beginning of this, in our webinar we had around the time, we said that you need to be cautious not to burn out. And this is why. I mean, the US has started to reopen some things now, but it's going to be a while before business as usual happens. And the security guys still need to keep their focus day, night, and all weekend.
Yeah, that's a big fear of mine is when that day does come, it's just going to bring us right back to 2 months ago, and it's going to be 10 times worse. But
Well, on a flip side to that, I mean, we were in negotiations yesterday with a college, and the college, the representative we were chatting to, outright said, "This has done more for our distance learning program than 10 years of development." Because all of the challenges, all of the pushback from the academics, all of the technical issues, all of the budgetary issues, everything just was like, nope, don't care, do it. And
really,
the situation didn't care. So they're actually finding their program for remote lessons, self-study and home study, has come on more than 10 years in the past 8 weeks.
oh
So
sure,
they are in massive favor of this. And particularly I've a number of colleagues who are still in academia, and they're now talking, they're seriously talking, saying, why do we need to run lectures? Why do we need to have those in a giant lecture hall? This works fine. So
man, we're going to be seeing some major changes to the norm.
Yeah.
So we know a lot of people are coping with this whole remote work situation. Are you seeing any trends with what people are doing to deal with this stuff?
Yes, a couple of big ones. The first one is companies who prepared in advance are having a far easier time than companies that did not.
Mm,
And the impacts of those, those aren't actually normalizing with time. They seem to be diverging. So the companies who, the distance between a company that did its prep work, that had security, continuity, access, and IT on their priorities list, they immediately pivoted very quickly into remote working, and they have been improving that as time has gone on. So they're actually still on the rise. They're still becoming more efficient, more effective working from home. Companies that didn't prep, they're improving, but they're not improving as much as those that did. And this is obviously a bit of a finger in the air, feel the wind, but I'm not entirely sure. I can't quite explain that yet. I need to get my head around it a bit more. And I think it really is not about the situation. I think it speaks more to the organization's core values and their core organizational operating principles. So I think everyone moved from the office to home. The businesses which had at least a priority and focus in services, systems, and continuity just swapped over and continue to improve. But those who didn't have a focus on it before still don't have a focus on it. Despite this extremely focusing event, they're still not focused on it. They haven't changed how they work. So they're getting left behind again, despite having, I think, this generation's biggest kick up the ass that we've ever seen. They're still lagging behind. And that's a serious problem. Shaking organizations out of apathy, and I know from talking to yourselves and talking to our sales team, it's a real challenge. It's a real challenge. And if a global pandemic didn't do it for those businesses, I'm not quite ready to throw the towel in, but I don't know what will. I don't know what will. If this doesn't make them stand up and pay attention and go, oh, hang on, we actually need to take security continuity seriously, then I'm not sure how to make them do that. And looking at the wider industry, I know there's some trends that are helping, particularly in the likes of finance. So finance now, you can't really be a financial institution unless you have considered cybersecurity. To some extent, the educational boards and authorities are starting to go that way, government departments more and more so. But an awful lot of private industry, until somebody comes in with a letter and says, right, you have to do this or you don't get to be a business anymore, I'm concerned at the lack of response. And as I said, those who did respond and did the work up front, they've had no problems. Their businesses are flourishing under these conditions. Those that did nothing, well,
yeah,
I hope for the sake of them that they still exist in 6 months.
I know.
But the pattern is pretty straight.
Yeah, think about it this way though, Ben. It's like I see it as sort of a trickle down. They always say like in investigations, follow the money, right? It's like I'm glad that these financial institutions are opening their eyes, adapting, and the industries that the manufacturing industry or just I don't want to say older industries, but more legacy industries. They never had to think about this stuff, and they're caught with their pants down, and it's just they're playing catch up.
Yes, exactly. But the problem is, the thing that caused them to have their pants down is now the thing that's stopping them catching up.
Yeah.
And that's what I can't get my head around. It's like, look, you've been kicked in the ass and you stuck your pants down.
Yeah.
Change, please. Yeah. Very frustrating.
Yeah. They'll come around to it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up for today. Ben, I had a blast talking to you today. I think this was one of the best sessions that we've had so far. Audience, thank you guys so much for joining. I'll let you get back to your day. Everyone stay safe. We're approaching the weekend. So let's enjoy the rest of our day. Ben, thanks again.
It's been a pleasure.
Cheers all.
Have a good weekend. Bye now.